Hello and welcome to this interactive handicapping and guide of how we're going to look at the Alabama Stakes at Saratoga this weekend. I'm going to take a look at this Ultimate Past Performance by Brisnet. This is the first time I'm looking at it, and I'm going to sort of explain what I look at when I'm looking at these horses, and then we're going to sort of try and make some picks if we can. So this is an early past performance. We've got no morning line prices yet. So let's first of all take a look at, the field. So we have, how many entries here do we have? We have, 10 entries, assuming all run. So the first thing that I'm going to do before I do anything else, I'm going to look at the pace. I'm going to try and figure out what the pace is going to be for this race. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use two things. I'm going to use this here next to the horse, which indicates their running style, as well as a number, which is between 1 and 8. 8 being, a strong likelihood that they run to this form. A 0 being, they're going to run pretty slow at the beginning of the race. So as I said, 1 through 8, I'm going to look for anything that looks like it's going to be, fast, and see how many horses are going to run fast. If we have that's going to let me identify if we have a speed duel, or alternatively, it might let me identify that one horse might just go to the lead and never get caught. So Sacred Wish, it can run early, and it has run early, but it's never really on the pace. And by that I mean it's never really right on the lead. And the way I'm going to identify that is I'm going to look down here as well. These E1, E2, and LP ratings. So this is the early part of the race. This is about the middle part of the race. And this is LP, is late pace. So when I look down here, this horse likes to run, pretty fast early and in the middle of the race. Considerably faster than at the end of the race. The last time out, in the Coaching Club Oaks, Grade 1 at Saratoga, you can see that it did run early in the race. It was over here, you can see at the start it was second, only a length and a half back. At the first call it was second, a length back. At the second call it was second, a half length back. Entering the stretch, it was first by 2.5 lengths, and it finished second by a neck. So that tells me that, it was on the pace. It took over at the top of the stretch, had a considerable lead, 2.5 lengths, and then just couldn't finish the job and was caught. Now, that could be for, many reasons. It could be maybe the distance was a little too much. Maybe, it ran too fast too early. But we see here that this -4 and this 0 means that it wasn't really a hotly contested pace. It was a pretty slow pace overall. The higher the number here means the higher the pace. So when we see something like +11 and +7, we know that that was a faster race. So it's more likely that somebody with a closing kick is going to pick up the pieces in a race like that. We also see over here the top finishers. So the ones in bold are in this race as well. So in the Coaching Club Oaks last time out, we saw Wet Paint win the race by a neck to Sacred Wish, who was second, and then 8.5 lengths behind that was Gambling Girl, who was third, who was also in this race. So one thing I'm going to look at that I already see as interesting by Sacred Wish is the fact that not only was it second last time out, but it was coming off running with Lasix. So I'm going to assume that maybe the second time off Lasix, it could potentially have a stronger run. I don't think the distance is a problem, because I look up here and I see a strong number, 117, under the distance. So I'm under the assumption that it can get 1.25 miles, which is a bit longer than the 1 1/8 last time out. It's also a filly, so it could still be improving, and it will still be improving if it's a good horse at 3 years old. And it didn't run a career best figure last time out. So why I look at something like that is if a horse has run extremely well, an all-time figure for that horse, there's a good chance that it could regress in the next race. Fillies tend to be ones who bounce more than other horses, and by bounce I mean they'll regress after a big effort, especially with not a tremendous amount of time, about less than a month here. So I think this horse could take a step forward, and I believe it's a big contender without even looking at the rest of the race yet. So before we go on to wet paint, we're going to look at the rest of these horses and see if there's any others that would like to be up and early on the pace. Fireline and Chocolate Gelato are very similar to Sacred Wish here with an EP5. Randomized as an E6 and Defining Purpose as an EP8. So Defining Purpose is one that's most likely going to be up on the lead as well as Randomized. Randomized likes to run early, as you can see here. In its last race, it was first at all the calls, finishing first by a length and a half. Granted, this was a restricted stakes race, and a tremendous effort nonetheless. 103 speed rating, so an all-time best figure. July 14th, about a month ago. Won by a length and a half. This horse is obviously going to take a lot of attention, in my opinion, but I'm probably going to stay away from it because this number scares me a bit here. This 103 at a mile, it's not been tested at anything over at a mile and a 16th, and there's a good chance that it could bounce off this number. So this is one that I'm going to play against. I do like that it runs early, so there's a good chance that it's going to force the speed duel. Not necessarily a duel, but it's going to keep an honest pace. If I look at Defining Purpose, I see it has experience over a mile and a 16th, a mile and an eighth here, but it didn't finish very well in the Kentucky Oaks. It was on the lead in the beginning of the race, and into the stretch and the finish, it just faltered off. It only has a 103 for the distance here, out of cross traffic, so I don't really like this one to be a contender, but I do like the fact that it can run early and keep an honest pace. It's also starting from outside in post 10, so the fact that this horse doesn't typically close would indicate to me that they're likely going to send this horse from the outside. It's not a short run into the first turn, as you can see here up top at the start of the race. They have to run all the way down the stretch and into the first turn. But if you're a horse like the number 10 and you like to show early speed, you don't want to get caught wide into that first turn. So you're going to likely flash your speed early, try and get a good position up front. That's going to force the other hand, that's going to force the hand of other horses like Randomized, who's going to run early, and you potentially get a speed duel in a situation like that. So what I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at horses that are either going to come from behind or just off the pace. So let's continue after Sacred Witch to look at Wet Paint. Now Wet Paint is obviously going to be a favorite here as well after the dominant performance last race. Not so much dominant beating Sacred Wish, but they were 8.5 lengths better than Gambling Girl. You can see in the comments here, it was 5 wide in the upper stretch and just got up in the last jumps. So this horse likes to come from behind. You can also see that under the late pace, 94, 110, 87 in the Oaks, 102, 108, 107. These are all very strong numbers that indicate this horse likes to come from behind. And it does it well. It has Flavian Pratt on board, as you can see here, who is this typical rider. And has 4 wins on board this horse in 9 starts. I'm going to typically play against a horse like Wet Paint, who I believe is going to be a short price, because I don't like to play too many favorites and I like to look for value. So moving on, we have Julia Shining here. Julia Shining looks like another strong 3-year-old out of Curlin, so this horse is going to most likely continue to get better over time. The distance should be no problem, 1.25 miles. And we do see that it has the S3 here, so it's not going to be as far back as Wet Paint, but it is going to likely run at the end of the race. It's out of Todd Pletcher, who is obviously one of the best trainers in the country, as you can see here at this meet. He has 83 horses run at Saratoga so far, and he's winning at a 20% clip. This horse is very lightly raced, having only raced 4 times. There could be issues with how sound the horse is, but there is a considerable break in between each of these runs. October to December to February, and then to April, and it's not run since. So it's been off for quite a while here. It has been running 5 furlong workouts at Saratoga, so that is encouraging. But I'd be a bit worried about how long this horse has been off for. It does tend to run well when it makes it to the racetrack, so there is that. I like that it's won here in the grade 2, and it's never run with Lasix, so having no Lasix today should be no problem at all. This is definitely one I would consider, but it would have to be at a price. If we move on again, we see Saber Tough. He's trained by Dallas Stewart, and immediately this horse does not look like a major contender. Last time out, it was just in an optional claiming race, having Lasix, and it only finished 3rd or 4th, beaten 3 1/4 lengths. The distance may be a problem, should be a problem. I was a 103. It's a Louisiana bred, which is typically not as strong as your Kentucky bred horses. I don't need to look too far into this one to dismiss it. If this one beats me, I'm happy to be beaten by it. If we move along again, we see Fireline. It was another 3-year-old, lightly raced out of Arrogate. Now when I look at this horse, the one thing that jumps out to me is this 95 speed figure here is a great number at a mile, but it ran that number with Lasix on. The performances without Lasix are decent, to say the least. We have a 4th place beaten by 6 finish in the grade 3 Delaware Oaks at the beginning of July. A 13 length romp in the maiden at Aqueduct, and a 5th place beaten 17 length finish in its first career race. The distance should be no problem at all, as it's got a very strong number here. But again, it worries me a bit that this career best number here has come with Lasix on. Running with no Lasix in the Delaware Oaks, it wasn't able to muster much, and at a shorter distance. I could be wrong again, but this is one I'm going to leave out. Chocolate Gelato is a 3-year-old out of Practical Joke. The distance isn't as strong as the others, but this one has some encouraging things to look at. We see the career best figure of 102, but that was coming at a 6 furlong race. It looks to me like this one may like a shorter distance, but Todd Pletcher is going to run it out there anyway at 1 1/4 miles. Now, the owner is Mike Rapoli, and I don't believe Todd Pletcher's other runner is Rapoli. No, it's not. But it wouldn't surprise me if this horse shows some early speed because of how much it likes to sprint. If that's the case, it could be another one in the mix for the early speed and keeping a very honest pace. Of the ones we like so far, Julia Shining would benefit tremendously from a very fast early pace, and that's what we would be hoping for here. So I'm not going to use Chocolate Gelato, but I'm going to hope that it forces an early, fast, contentious lead. Next, if we look at Gambling Girl, another one from Todd Pletcher, and this one is owned by Rapoli as well. So now I'm led to believe that Chocolate Gelato is going to be in this race to force the early pace, because if we look at Gambling Girl here, it likes to run late in the race. We know that last race it was beaten considerably by Wet Paint and Sacred Wish, losing 8.5 lengths, finishing 3rd. It was the favorite in this race, as you can see here, a very short price favorite. So we have to make a decision here. Do we think it's going to bounce back? Do we think it's going to run back to the favorite form where it's performed well in the past? As you can see here in the Kentucky Oaks, it was beaten just a neck. In the Gazelle, beaten half a length. But it has lost in the past to Wet Paint again and Julia Shining. I don't like this one to win, but I do like the fact that it's Rapoli's second horse in the race, and there is a great chance that Chocolate Gelato is going to force an early lead to set up a nice closing run from Gambling Girl. Moving on to randomized, this is the one we spoke about already. It's going to likely run early. There shouldn't be too much doubt of that. Because it's also on the outside, there's even more urgency to run fast early because it wants to get in a good position going into the first turn. It doesn't want to be caught too far wide because the more ground you lose, obviously, the worse for the horse. You want to try and cover as little ground as possible. That's why a good rail trip is something that you always want to see, depending on the track condition. The next horse is Taxed. Now, this horse was claimed way back in November last year after its third career race. The trainer now is Randy Morse. It's run nothing but stakes races, and it's fared alright. The last time out it was in Indiana, prior to that Pimlico, and then it's previously ran primarily at Oaklawn Park. It's had some definitely decent efforts, especially against Wet Paint here. As you can see, it's finished second to Wet Paint 2 times. And it's usually right in the money there. This is one that could definitely run decently, but I question 1.25 miles. Out of the sire collected, I just wouldn't put my money on this horse being able to continue this performance into a grade 1 race. It's ran very well at grade 3 and grade 2 races, but this is a step up, and I don't believe it's going to be able to compete. And then we finish with Defining Purpose, who we spoke about in the beginning, that we don't really like this horse, but we do like the fact that it's going to run early from the outside. Now, that leaves me with 2 selections here. Julia Shining and Sacred Wish. Both of these horses, I think, have great chances to win. Sacred Wish is on the rail, so it should get a great trip around the track as long as Velasquez can not get caught in too much traffic. The same with Julia Shining. In post position 3, it's likely not going to lose too much ground. I think it's going to take a step forward here, being off since April. Each time it's run, it's pretty much run better than the last time out. So if we can assume that process is going to continue, we could see a huge speed figure here. And that's going to be the reason that I'm going to have Julia Shining on top in this race. So we don't have early prices here, but we'll definitely check back later in the week and see. Especially being in Europe, I'll have the opportunity to bet this race at fixed odds, which is a great benefit of being over here in the UK. That's it, and that's how I think this race is going to unfold. Julia Shining, Sacred Wish are my top 2 picks. I'd probably use them on top in some sort of trifecta. Thanks for watching, and best of luck.